Good evening, everyone. We're going to begin. I just got the go-ahead from our tech support, so we can start. My name is Claire DeRoche. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Social Justice Coordinator for the Unitarian Universalist Congregation at Shelter Rock, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Election 2020 Debrief. This program is co-sponsored by the Veatch program at UUCSR and the UUCSR Social Justice Committee. And we're so happy to be able to present this to you tonight. For this program, we have organized a panel of knowledgeable, experienced activists. In addition, we have a terrific moderator. And most importantly, for this virtual experience, as I said before, we have a very competent tech assistant. So take a few deep breaths and sit back and enjoy what I promise will be a satisfying hour of engaging conversation. At the end of the hour, we are offering the opportunity for you to have further conversation among yourselves. If you would like to do this, when the program ends, simply stay. Don't leave the program. You will be randomly assigned to a breakout room for up to 20 minutes of unstructured conversation. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to Joan Manieri, the Executive Director of the Veatch program, who has a few words to share with us. Joan?
Great, thank you so much, Claire. It's so wonderful to see you all. I'm so looking forward to this conversation and to having this conversation with all of you. And I just want to take a moment to echo Claire's words of welcome on behalf of the Veatch program. Our staff and our board of governors really have appreciated the opportunity to partner to host this election debrief. And I just want to take a quick moment to express our gratitude to our grantee partners, Rosemary, Seft, and Nicole. We know your work does not begin or end with the presidential election. We know how tirelessly you work every day to bring about the transformational change we so desperately need and that we know is possible. Thank you for all you do and for taking the time to be with us this evening. And thank you so much to Domenico Romero from our Veatch staff, who will be moderating the discussion and did so much to bring us together this evening.
Thank you, David.
So now,
hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and on this with such incredible panel that we were able to convince them. Now we didn't have to do much convincing. They are always excited to share and to spend time with us, with people at the Veatch program, with people at the congregation, and some of them have been at the congregation sometimes for in-person events and always enjoyed it. This time we'll have to do it virtually, but on the other hand, it's a great opportunity for some of us who don't necessarily can always travel to the congregation to be able to be part of this program. So we're very excited about that. And let me introduce you to our three panelists. First, I would like to, and I'm gonna tell you a little bit about the three of them, and then I'll start asking them some of the questions that we want to discuss today. First, with us is Rosemary Rivera. She's the co-executive director of Citizen Action and the Public Policy and Education Fund of New York, a statewide grassroots membership organization fighting for social, racial, economic, and environmental justice at the local, state, and federal levels. Originally from New York City, Ms. Rivera has been an organizer in Syracuse and Rochester, and with Service and Employee International Union's SEIU 1199 Healthcare Education Project. She has deep policy and organizing expertise in the area of education, justice, and restorative practices. Also with us today is Seft Hunter, PhD. He is the director of Black-led organizing and power building at Community Change, which is a national organization. In this role, Seft leads Community Change's work to build Black organizing infrastructure, challenge and eradicate historically oppressive racialized structures, and build Black political power to change the material conditions on the ground in communities of color across the country. Prior to joining Community Change, he served as executive director of the Kansas and Missouri-based Communities Creating Opportunity, where he successfully led a multi-state research study to map the impact of persistent racial poverty and the differences in life expectancy between Black and white communities in Kansas and Missouri. And also with us today is Nicole Pressley. She's the national organizer for UU The Vote, a nonpartisan program of the UUA. Through this initiative, Unitarian Universalists are answering the call to mobilize communities to vote love and defeat hate in the 2020 elections. Prior to assuming this position, Ms. Pressley was an organizer and communications strategist working with the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Atlanta. As UU The Vote national organizer, she strives to engage congregations in relationships to reach beyond the walls of our congregations in order to move hearts and minds in service to justice and liberation. So thank you, Rosemary, Seft, and Nicole for being here with us today. And I'm gonna start asking you the first question. Basically, we're gonna have three questions about the time before the election, this time in which we are now still during the election, and the future, what comes after that. So the first question is what work did your organization do towards the election, and what challenges and opportunities existed during that time? So I'm going to invite Seft to share with us first for 3 minutes, and Seft, I'll give you a little sign if time is running too long.
Okay, and I'm looking forward to that flag there, Domenico, because I get excited. I sometimes get a little excited and lose track of time. But again, good evening, everybody. Really thrilled to be here with you. Again, I'm with Community Change, a national organization based in Washington, D.C. We were founded after the assassination of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, just post 1968. And so directly to your question, before the election, Community Change, we generally run a fairly massive electoral program with a number of groups, probably about 100 different groups across the country. Many of these groups are Black and Latinx led groups. So it's, we work primarily with people of color, really in almost every part of the country. And our goal this year was to really identify where are those areas where we can make the most critical difference. And so we know, looking at the kind of pattern of voter participation over the last 2.5 decades, that some of the same states that we know generally are competitive during elections. So like Florida, Wisconsin, Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, right? And in essence, like our goal, we started probably about a year in advance, really working with these partners, assessing their capacity, right? Helping them kind of build out strategies, leading training. This was so much of this happened pre-COVID. So we were on the ground with folks in church basements and union halls and things like that, really looking at the granular details of MAP and developing their strategies and just ensuring that our partners were actually ready. We set out a program that depended on a combination of traditional tactics, starting with voter registration, nonpartisan voter registration, also, phone banking, door-to-door canvassing, right? And then COVID happened and we had to rapidly shift our approach, and we basically shifted to doing what's called a relational program using an app called Outvote. And in essence, it's a texting app. And so individuals similar to this, like on a Zoom call, would download the app. We would send them a sample or a set of individuals to reach, and they would have a set of digital conversations and then move those folks towards commitment. We also tested another strategy using the same tool, but using what we call a friend-to-friend strategy, right? Because we know that if folks kind of reach into their network, have conversations with the people who they know and love, right? That those individuals are best placed, are best suited to motivate and then mobilize those folks out to vote. And so we had to very quickly, back in March, shifted almost exclusively to doing both the friend-to-friend strategy and then the peer-to-peer strategy. And we ended up at the end of the cycle with roughly about 13 million voter contacts, and had significant impact in all the states that I lived in. Obviously, Florida, right? Not gonna say much more there, but certainly with Wisconsin, Arizona, Michigan, and Nevada had a critical impact in those key states. And so I know we're going to get to it here in a bit, but there are always a number of lessons that we learned. In part, as we were kind of doing this work, we also were kind of moving our partners through a set of scenarios, right? So these are a set of kind of, what if this happens? So what if the election is postponed and we can't do it? Like, what if, all these different scenarios. And in part, actually one of the scenarios we're living right now, right? We're actually in one of the scenarios that we put forward right now, that we talked about right now. And so our partners are still in, like, really kind of moving throughout those plans that we laid with them, leading up to the election. So with that, I think that's a good place to pause. And I know that there are other questions that we could talk through, like what we learned and then what it means going forward.
Awesome, Seth. Thanks so much. And Seft and community change that work at the national level provide us that picture of how this work was happening at community change and many other groups at the national level. Rosemary is going to help us to look at this picture, getting it closer to home, how this work was happening at the state level. So Rosemary, if you want to share with us a little bit of how the work was going before the election, please.
Sure. So first of all, I want to start off by saying thank you to Veatch for hosting this, and also for the support that you give our organization. I think it's really important. I also want to take a moment and explain a little bit about our C3 and C4 status in this context, because we're having somewhat of a political conversation, and Veatch funds us to do non-political work, and we separate that very clearly. I am the co-executive director of the Public Policy and Education Fund, which is what Veatch funds, and it is a C3, which means that we do no lobbying, no endorsements, we do not cross that line, but we do a lot of the civic engagement, a lot of the training, a lot of outreach and talking to people. It's very labor intensive to go into communities, particularly Black and Brown communities, and really build the kind of trust through our, what we call our mass engagement program. So we don't just come in on the day of election and knock on the door. Prior to all of this, we had been reaching into communities, really talking to them, building the trust, getting them engaged, putting them through our leadership development programs, and then getting them active in terms of the issues that concern many of the New Yorkers right now. So I want to just be clear on that as we move forward. But this election cycle, I'll be honest with you. I know that we just finished talking a little bit about what happens at the federal level, but the federal impact on the state level this year was heightened, right? Especially once COVID hit. So similarly, we also had to switch over, get very creative about how we did our outreach and our organizing. And, COVID was definitely the big challenge to all of us, but there were other challenges. One of the unintended consequences of COVID was actually a positive one, is that we actually had more reach, because I'm not sure, but it seemed like more people were home, and whether they were just like tired of talking to the same family members as we were all in this, quarantine, they were willing to talk. And we would ask them things like, hey, how are you? And they're like, fine. And we were saying like, well, we're not fine. Like, this is what's going on. And they would open up. And so it was a real opportunity for us to really listen to people about what they were experiencing on the ground in New York State, and then move them from actually, which is what one of our theories is, that we take grassroots power and then we connect it to electoral power in terms of really sharing with them why it's so important for you to get, to have the vote out, do the trainings. We do some political education around runaway inequality in the state of New York. So, while everyone was rightly so looking at the federal elections, there was a lot happening in New York State. There was a potential of winning a supermajority here in New York State that would be a veto-proof power to Governor Cuomo. With our partners, we also, our partner organization, Citizen Action of New York, works with the Working Families Party. And this year, Governor Cuomo had made it so that third-party organization, third parties had to actually get a higher level of votes on the line in order to actually maintain their ballot line. And that became a big focus because the parties of the Working Families Party do something called fusion voting. They can actually endorse both Republicans and Democrats, et cetera. But the whole thing is about, it's not about the party, it was about the issue. What is really important to really moving those issues? And so that became a big deal here in New York State. And honestly, the Working Families Party blew through the goals there and actually moved up in a ballot line. So, you have Democrats, Republicans, you had conservatives and Working Families Party. The Working Families Party actually has moved up to row C in the ballot line. And some did not make it, right? Like the Green Party has lost their ballot line, just to be clear on that. But for us, we did a lot of what like David just talked about. We did a lot in terms of political education. We did a lot just in the month of October. I just pulled up some numbers just for the month of October. We had 130,681 text messages go out and called and had conversations with 21,000 people in New York State. That's just in 1 month. So you can imagine, with all of the months and all of the work that we've done, we've talked to a lot of people. And I think I'll pause there because I'm not sure of time here and let someone else speak. Okay.
Thank you. You did great, Rosemary, but thank you. And as we get closer to what we do in our action, Unitarian Universalists have been active, of course, on their regular life, but also as Unitarians in the context of the election. UU the Vote is a program that created opportunities for all Unitarians, but particularly young Unitarians to be active during this time. And Nicole is gonna tell us a little bit of how that process went and what happened. All in what was all the work that happened towards the election. So Nicole, please share with us a little bit of that experience.
Yes. First, I just want to say thank you all for having me. It is great to be on these panels and talk about how we understand this election, what happened. Just want to say immense gratitude to Seft and Rosemary, because we know that long-term organizing and building that infrastructure is always key, and definitely was key in this election. UU the Vote started out as an idea, a couple years ago. Unitarian Universalists on a large national and organized scale had not done electoral organizing and get out the vote initiatives like the one that we had this year. But when we did the planning process, what we knew to be true, right, is that it is going to be critical for us to build partnerships with folks that are on the ground, that know the landscape, that are taking care of their communities and provide the strategy and the direction for those communities to win, right? So we have had folks in over 40 states involved in UU the Vote. We organized congregations, we organized our state action networks to build those partnerships to do electoral work within an ecosystem where we could support long-term base buildings to build to build power. That included our state action network in Arizona, doing work with Poder and Puente, and North Carolina doing work with Blueprint, in Michigan doing work with Restaurant Opportunity Center, in Ohio doing work with Ohio Organizing Collective, in Georgia, where I was, doing work with New Georgia Project, Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, and Georgia Equality, the LGBTQ advocacy group. In Wisconsin, we worked with Wisconsin Voices, and we had a beautiful local and national partnership with New Florida Majority in Florida. This allowed us to do a lot more than we thought we were capable of, honestly. We did census work, making sure that we were doing the work to engage, hard to count communities and making sure that their voices were heard and that they got counted. It allowed us to do early GOTV work, which was critical, especially in Georgia, right? We started making calls and sending text messages in June. Well, no, before June, because the primary was on the 9th. So we had done phone calls and text messages, particularly to Gwinnett and Cobb County, to talk about the sheriff's races that were happening there and asking voters, do you want the police to act as ICE and continue to terrorize Latinx communities? Or do you want sheriffs that are actually, doing their job and worrying about community safety rather than policing and terrorizing your communities? And as we saw, folks had an answer for that, which was beautiful. Doing that early work not only allowed us to grow our internal capacity, right? Teaching folks and growing our own organizing muscle that was just not there before. But all of that work, our 4,000 plus volunteers, our many state action networks, they allowed us to reach out to 3 million voters. We made, and the numbers are still coming in. This has been a long electoral season, so we gave some folks a break on reporting, but we'll get those numbers. But we reached out to over 3 million voters. We made over 700,000 phone calls. We made over 300,000 text messages. There were 1.2 plus million letters and postcards that went out to folks. And that volume matters, but what that translates into, right, is that Arizona passed Prop 207, right, and 208, which decriminalized marijuana and invested in education. We see that Florida was able to pass a minimum wage increase. And like I said, in Georgia, we were able to beat back 287G and force some wild runoff. So I'm just really excited about the work that we have done and the fact that we were doing it in partnership, particularly with queer, with Black, with Latinx organizers that have been on the ground and basically saying, what do you need? How can we support? And I know that work was critical, being able to have our own dialer and say, just give us the list and the script and we got you. You don't have to do all the work on your own, and us saying, you don't have to come train. We will train our folks to do that work, making sure that we can fill in those gaps, right? Because we know COVID-19 hit communities really hard, and it made that work a lot more difficult for our frontline communities. So that's what we did, and that's what we will continue to do.
Thank you, Nicole. That is incredible, and brings it home to what the type of activism that many of us were able to do. And now all that activism, all that work, all that time created an incredible momentum to be active in democracy and to be engaged and to make our people's voices heard, right, and help others' voices, those who sometimes were disenfranchised, to be able to have a say in the system. And we're in this moment. We are still the president. The election passed, though we are still on this state of not fully completion of the process, and the work is never done. And not only it's not only something to say, but but we know that the reasons why people were engaging in taking their democracy as a tool and making their voices heard, those issues are still out there, and there's going to be need to keep the work on. So with that, I want to ask you, where are you now? And I'm gonna make my way now in the way back, starting with Nicole. Where are you now after all this mobilization? Where are you, and what are the plans for the future, for the next few months or for the next 4 years? So Nicole, if you want to share with us.
Yeah, and I'll keep it quick. Sorry, I went a little long and I didn't have my screen on you.
You're doing great.
But in the immediate, what we're doing is making sure we organize deeply to continue to flank our partners in Georgia and make sure that we are organizing Georgia folks for Georgia outcomes. I am from Georgia. I have been temporarily displaced, but I'm figuring out my way back there to make sure that I can be on the ground to support that work. And then we are looking forward to holding people's feet to the fire on 100 days stuff. We got through this big hurdle, but now we want to see policy that supports the communities that delivered this win. So that is what we're doing, building up our volunteer base, throwing down in Georgia, and building so we can see some real results and some real accountability in the first 100 days.
Thank you, Nicole. And sorry, I meant to say that I'm combining now the second and third question in order to give you all a chance to give us a little bit of more extensive answers. So if you want to go on, you can keep it going for other three.
Yeah. As I said before, this program was an idea. It was kind of plopped into Unitarian Universalism with, zero, not completely zero because we had our state action networks, but not that much infrastructure there to begin with. So what we're doing right now is what we're clearly seeing is the need to really dig deep and do the work, especially, right? Unitarian Universalism is a majority white faith, right? That is just the truth about the situation. And we are making sure that you, the vote, is engaging in explicitly anti-racist conversations within our networks and within our communities. The beautiful thing about us doing this project is that it engaged us all in shared work towards shared goals. And now we need to talk about the results of this election and what that means for ourselves, our country, and our faith. And that means we clearly have to reckon with white supremacy because we celebrate the fact that, we saw record voter turnout, but we saw record voter turnout that said yes to kids in cages, that said yes to 240,000+ people dying of COVID, right? That said yes to wild militarism in our streets. That's what folks said yes to. And we have a reckoning, right? We have to talk to folks in our faith and in our congregation that says, have these, not only do we need to be clear that that is wrong, but have the policies, right? Have the neoliberal policies of the past actually reckon with white supremacy in a way to continue to move our communities along. So that is the work that we're doing ahead. We will have lots and lots of programs to really engage in those conversations in our network and in the larger world and bring our faith into the public square, because we have, we say side with love. I see a few of you on the call today with your Side with Love shirts. We have to mean that, right? And the part of you, the vote, was a part of that commitment to meaning that says, hey, with our Black and Latinx and Indigenous communities, we are with you and we are going to support you. And we're also going to do the internal work to make sure we can build a movement to support you and to support your communities.
Thank you, Nicole. So making our way back into the national scene, let's let's see, Rosemary, where are we in New York, and what are the plans for the future for citizen action and the yeah, for you all. Nicole, Rosemary. We're going with Rosemary first. There you are.
Hi. Hi. First of all, I just want to say I want to cheer every time Nicole was speaking here. Particularly, I just want to be real about this. 4 years ago, this election really really hit me some kind of way because 4 years ago, when Trump first got elected, I had gone to sleep that night kind of early. I was told my grandkids, hey, we can expect that, tomorrow we will have the first woman president, like kind of encased in the New York bubble of progressivism, right? And then woke up and had to have like a real serious conversation with my granddaughter, who like looked at me with tears in her eyes going, are we going to war? Like actually afraid, because Trump had won. And so this year, to me, this election was about a real, a real reckoning and a referendum on, our country as a whole and white supremacy as a whole. And I didn't get the resounding thunk that I really wanted, right? At the end of the day, more and more Caucasian people actually voted for Trump, et cetera. And so that says to me that we have miles to go before we sleep, right? We have a tremendous amount of continued training and understanding that the only way that we're going to beat this kind of hate is with love, is with compassion, etc. So honestly, we haven't done a deep analysis as of yet, but in New York State, I recognize that in the places where we have very strong chapters and a lot of capacity, I think of Rochester, where we picked up, seats of progressives who are really true progressives there, where we picked up in the Western New York, in terms of the New York State Senate races, that we worked with and aligned with a lot of other power building organizations, including Make the Road and Focal New York and so many others. And I'd like to remind you that, we this interplay between the federal and I'm very blessed to be working for an organization that looks at all three levels of government, at the federal, the state, and the local, and creates doorways in terms of what people are seeing and feeling and hearing and smelling at the local level. Because right now, we're actually in a moment where New Yorkers are seriously suffering. I mean, if you think about it, homelessness will be on the rise. We have students across New York State. I think of Rochester, that even pre-COVID, they were losing teachers at an alarming rate. We have, so on education, on housing, we somehow also lost the narrative in terms of bail and criminal justice, and they beat that back. And narrative and worldview, and what story do we tell and create, how do we create meaning of the world that we around us, becomes that much more important. And what kind of a world, what kind of vision do we all see? So I think that there, when I analyze things about, well, why didn't we win in certain places on the New York State Senate? How come we don't have a supermajority now? And I'm going, well, there's a couple of reasons, right? I think of redistricting. Census work is so important. We did census work all over the place. I think of redistricting. I think of money in politics and the infusion of money that came in. As a matter of fact, in Long Island alone, I know that Lauder, the Estee Lauder guy, put like millions of dollars into races right in Long Island. If that has an impact. And so I think that we need to like really strengthen places that we're already and go even deeper and dive deeper, but we also need to think about in New York, where are we not at? that we need to like really grow and in order to move to a place where we can actually win. And when I say win, to me, it's not always about, the elector and, who's the person in there, but what are we winning in terms of the people? Because the people are struggling, the people are suffering right now. And the federal government, at this point, we're looking in New York State to the federal government to kind of bail us out with local aid to our communities, with COVID relief packages and so on and so forth. We may be looking there, but it won't be enough. So what we need to do now is really think about how do we create sustainable communities and really meet the needs, because COVID has really exposed the inequities in New York State at a big level. And right now, in order to really fund the needs of New York State, with our children, make sure that people have a roof over their head, even pre-COVID, we had 96,000 people on any given day who were homeless in New York, in the wealthiest country, in the wealthiest state in world history. So how are we thinking about the revenue that comes into our state? We are in a budget crisis, and we must focus, I'll take 1 second more. We must focus on revenue in New York State. We need to really think about the runaway inequality and try to have progressive taxation rather than the regressive taxation. And we can do it, folks.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. And that part that you just mentioned is so important, particularly in when we realize the economic impact that the COVID crisis has had in communities, and relief is not happening, and so all this new agenda is going to be really, really critical. And talking about the agenda, so also at the national level, there are so many challenges. So Seft, what is next?
Yes, sometimes I forget I'm on the panel because I really enjoy just listening, right? And so much about our work is about showing up and listening, right? It's being present with folks who are really in the throes of the work, right? Who are connected to the people and the places of our country who most need to see their power built and exercised in new ways. And I think in part, like our theory of change at Community Change, I can't say change too much because we have change in the name, but it really depends on engaging people of color, women of color, white folks, Latinx folks, Black folks, right? Primarily focused on like, how do we actually build collective power to change, as I said, the material conditions for folks who have not seen opportunity extended to them in their lifetime, right? And we know when we look at this population, in part, the choice is often not to vote for one party or the other, but it's to vote for one party or not vote at all, right? And so and we saw, obviously, as I was listening to Rosemary, we didn't need too much analysis to recognize that there are some folks who exercised the latter option, which was to not vote in 2016. And we saw what happened. And I think in part, like, as we thought about leading up to this election, we had to really look at, like, how do we problematize the idea that sitting it out is not a safe choice, right? There are, in fact, consequences that happens when we choose not to sit out. And at the same time, we have to be mindful that the folks that we are engaging cannot reliably point to how our participation, right, have often resulted in direct changes in our lives, right? So this democracy doesn't often work for people like me, right? And we saw many of the folks who were coming out over the summer, right? Diverse folks all over the country came out with that as a real central rallying cry. And so it's actually in that context that the conversation was being had, the invitation was being issued in inviting folks to participate in states all across the country. We know that this is a record-breaking election where even the loser in this case got more votes than any other president in the history of the United States, right? And so a few issues that were critically important to individuals as we were having these conversations, right? And we had roughly around 13 million engagement across our partnerships across the country. And in part, one of the central issues was getting rid of the president was the number 1 issue, right? Folks recognize that there are in fact divisions. We have different points of view on, is it Medicaid for all, or is it just is it just keeping the ACA? So we know that there were deep policy issues that were overlooked in this election because most of our folks were really focused on just defeating the president and restoring some level of decency in the country, right? But now that we're post that, right? What folks are really interested in is we recognize that this is an opportunity for us to look at how do we repair the harm? How do we repair the decades and centuries of harm to Black and Latinx communities? How do we ensure that we're reuniting the nearly 500 plus children who were really forcibly separated from their parents with no hope or process for restoration? How do we once and for all address COVID, where we know roughly 10 million individuals are currently infected, and we know that rates are going up. We do know that Black, Brown, and Indigenous people are most severely impacted. We know that there's going to be a COVID relief bill at some point. We've gotten more judges, still waiting for COVID, but we're going to be pressing on COVID. And I think in part, like we have to collectively really kind of put our forces together to ensure that this recovery is actually just, right? We need to see that this recovery is going to reach the people and the places in the economy in our country who most need it, right? And so it's not gonna be fast, y'all. We're not gonna be free tomorrow. But what we're not gonna do, what we recognize that we absolutely cannot do, is withdraw from the process. We have to keep our hands on the till and ensure that we continue to kind of push towards justice.
Thank you very much, Seft, and thank you for that last part. I think we sometimes would like that things were done and we can just go and sit and relax and let the good stuff happen on its own. But unfortunately, that's not really the case. And actually, there's a big cost on us just relaxing too much and thinking that somebody else is going to change things, because then they can change, but in different direction if those who are active are seeking for different change. I would like to ask you all there were a couple of questions in the chat. One of them, Rosemary, already addressed the question of the breath bill. That is not a bill; it's a resolution. But I think the question that seems to be sort of a little bit more salient here in people's mind and is about what is happening now and how Trump is going to leave or exit, and what does it mean for the work that you all are doing, for the communities that you all are working with. So considering that we are already moving towards the end of the program, I would love to ask you if in a couple minutes each you could close your participation in a way addressing that what is happening with Trump and what is happening with your work. So I'll start with Rosemary this time, so that to shake things up a little bit.
Sure. I actually wrote my response in the chat a minute ago, but I think Trump will leave the White House kicking and screaming like a spoiled brat that he is, like a spoiled rotten child. I am really concerned about what happens next. I think that the first 100 days of the Biden administration are going to be important. As of today, like people are really thinking about the cabinet appointments that need to happen. I think there'll be some challenges, but I think we will persevere and Biden will get the transition that he needs to get to. It'll just be a really severe headache. Like even the GA is not really signing the papers to actually move things over to Biden. Reality is that I think we need to really think closely at the national level, and we are also belong to People's Action and other, national groups, and we need to think really carefully about what kind of a tone do we set, because there's a part like the Breathe Act made me think, when Claire asked about the Breathe Act, made me think that the country as a whole needs to breathe right now. Like, we've been so incredibly divided. Like, I just want to heal and breathe for a second before we start really going nuts and pushing. We have a potential of this swinging, of this pendulum swinging kind of center right or further right, because of we didn't get the resounding funk that we wanted, right? And so that's a dangerous place. It's kind of a precipice that we are in right now. And so I think it's going to be important, these cabinet members, in order to figure out what the inside game is and what the tone on the outside should be in order to move the way we need to. Thank you, Domenico, sorry.
Thank you, Rosemary. Nicole, do you want to tell us in a couple of minutes?
Sure. I think Trump will eventually have to leave the office because he's been fired and the country knows it. I think, and I will say this, and I think that work is not only because of the work of voters and because of the work of organizers, but it is because of the people that have been loudly, whether it is on social media, in their networks, and in the streets, being clear that the voters will decide who runs our country. The voters choose our leaders. And I think that this is one time where we are actually winning the narrative that, yep, we voted, people voted in many different ways, and each of those votes count, and each of those votes will be counted, and we will let that determine who won the election. That's clear, right? Trump's doing all types of gymnastics to put together a narrative in which he wins, and it's not there. But we know that in the past we have lost because we just said the system will work itself out. Well, like, we had an impeachment, right? We had impeachment hearings and the system did not work itself out, right? It is the people, right? Our democracy, in fact, aren't just our institutions and what is written on a sheet of paper. It is the people. And as long as the people stay vigilant and say, we voted, we decided, and this is who our president are, and we declare what the real reality is, we'll be good. And he will leave, and I will enjoy every minute of it.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you, Nicole. And Seft, how do you think this is gonna happen?
So we actually spent probably at the time I felt like was way too much time on this scenario, right? Because I'm thinking it's never gonna happen. Oh no, it's happening, y'all. It's happening. And I do think, with all seriousness, we cannot say, like, I don't feel like I could say, because we know that I do believe ultimately ends up leaving, but I think in part, like, we have to be mindful of what's the level of damage that's happening. I'm here in Georgia, right? They're going to be recounting millions of votes by hand, y'all, by hand, right? Because the senatorial candidates, the national Republicans, have pressured the Republican Secretary of State. First, they called on him to resign, right? Because their candidate didn't win. Now they're pressuring him into a hand recount. And I think we have to be really careful of shenanigans here. I think in part, if you look at, like, not just the moves here in Georgia, but in Pennsylvania and other states, the tactic is to try to get basically try to drag out the process so that the Electoral College cannot actually have their formal vote on December 14th, is to try to basically push through the process so that states actually miss the dates to basically certify their elections. And so that is actually the move. And the question is, will he be able to pull it off? Well, we know in order for the president to do that, a number of folks will have to be complicit in the process. And we're seeing at the national level that some of the 2024 politics are right smack dab in the midst of this. All the candidates who want to run in 2024 are complicit to the president. The entire Senate is complicit to the president because they need his support for these 2 open Senate seats. And so no one is going to take him on at this point. And so we see all these tactics. I do think in part, like, it's going to take the same level of vigor that it took us to win this election. Is we're going to have to basically use that same level to protect the vote. And then finally, I would say that we, as it relates to policy, we cannot have all of our energy be placed in this process where we're rushing towards reunification at the expense of actually moving responsive policies on behalf of the folks who came out to vote. Right? So it can't be that our only goal is about unity at the expense of Black women, Latinx women, and all the folks who came out and basically risked life and limb in the middle of a pandemic. Let it not be that all of our focus is on some false unity that gets us nowhere. That's only demanded when Democrats are in charge. It is never demanded when anybody else is in charge. And a win is a win, right? Thomas Jefferson described a win as 50+1. Right? So we have record number of voters. We flip blue, what were formerly red states. Let's call that a win. That is not like squeezing across the finish line. That is knocking over the ribbon and jumping boldly into it. So let's kind of pick our energy up and not spin it, what is a resounding victory, into, you know, a lack of a mandate. No, it's a resounding mandate. And let's move consistent with our understanding of that.
Yeah. Thank you, Seft. That is wonderful, and thank you once again, Rosemary, Nicole, and Seft for spending this hour with us at Shelter Rock. I think we all have learned so much and become inspired and thinking about being vigilant. But I'm gonna let Claire DeRoche to invite you all to talk more about this.
Thank you very much, Domenico. Wasn't that a great conversation? I don't know about you, but I'm breathing again, and I feel re-energized and ready to take the next steps because they are so important. Unless you're all a group of real introverts and need to think about this before you talk about it, which is fine. You can go now or you can stay. If you choose to leave, that's wonderful. Go forth, think about what you've heard, and think about what you are going to commit to doing to keep democracy thriving in our country, because we each have a part in it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Domenico and Joan. This was a great experience, and I hope we do it again. And I hope David is here with us when we do it again. So thank you all very much.